Line, we are talking about the flood that happened 10 years ago here in the mid-state, what happened then and the things that have gone right and wrong since then. It is your chance to ask our expert questions about how the government handled things, about insurance issues that maybe you stumbled upon and still can't figure out. Go ahead and give us a call, 615-737-PLUS. We're going to get right to the phone lines. We have Ashley on the line. Ashley, thank you for sticking through the commercial break. What's your question or comment tonight?
Hey, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
What are some ways that I can encourage lawmakers and politicians to listen to our concerns as a community and prepare Nashville for the next big storm?
Sure. And Laura, if you didn't catch that, Ashley was asking just what are some ways she can encourage lawmakers to listen to the concerns of citizens to prepare our city for hopefully a flood that doesn't come again, but likely will?
Yeah, it's a great question. I get that a lot being based in Washington. And, we're constantly asking policymakers to listen. And the best thing that resonates with them is personal stories in their backyard, right? We all kind of connect with what we know. And so really trying to communicate if you've experienced a flood event, if you've been impacted, if you're having issues or concerns about your flood insurance, or if you're also happy with something that you see the city's doing, right? The governor and the mayor of Nashville have been fairly proactive about getting ahead of that next storm. And we need that in more policymakers and more political makers. So make those calls, write letters, put in your asks, because they really do listen to constituents. And if they don't hear from you, they don't hear from you.
Good advice there. All right, we have Thomas, who's also been waiting on the line. Thomas, thanks for being part of Open Line tonight.
Hi, Laura. Thanks so much for taking my question. I'm a renter in Nashville. I've been living here for about 3 years, but I've really been trying to make moves to become a homeowner in Nashville. And honestly, I've been kind of nervous with all the, obviously it's the anniversary of the flood, bad weather we've been having. We're honestly waiting on some bad weather right now as well. But do you know if it's required for people selling their homes in the Nashville area to, I guess, let home buyers know or disclose potential home buyers if homes have flooded in the past?
Great question, Thomas. Thank you. I'm going to hang up so you can listen to your TV and hear what Laura has to say.
That's a great question, and a big concern, as you are embarking on your what is often the largest financial decision you'll ever make in your life, that you want to know that you're buying a home that is in the right area, in a good area. And thankfully, the state has some good requirements in place so that when someone goes to sell the home, they have to list certain information about flooding. That's a great policy decision that was made at the state level for that requirement to be in place, because it really equips consumers with that information.
Was that made after the flood, or has that always been on the books as far back as you know, or was it made after 2010?
It has been on the books for quite some time, and not all states have that, so that is really something to be proud of. Because we hear time and time again, people in that same position who go to buy a home, and you trust the realtor and the person who built that house. And so it's really important that that type of information be made available so that you can understand, has this home flooded before? Do I need to carry flood insurance? Has mitigation occurred? Is this home elevated? Have they done other things to this house to make it more resilient to flooding?
Thank you for that call, Thomas. Let's go to Logan now. Logan, what's your question or comment tonight? Hi, Logan. You're on the line. Go ahead.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks
Good.
for taking my question. So obviously, since the flood in 2010, Nashville has really grown a lot with buildings and development kind of all over the region. Can you talk a little bit about how that plays into some of these flooding issues that we're seeing? And if we're going to have to kind of stop development in some areas, is that not going to hurt our economic recovery as we're kind of in the midst of some struggling times with the pandemic?
Logan, thank you. Laura, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, good question. I think I'll answer the first part first, which is that, there are along the rivers and creeks, there's a big effort by the city to buy out properties along those waterways and really leave those areas to open floodway, so that they are trails and walkways for people to enjoy when it's sunny, and when it's raining, those areas can flood and no harm is done to homeowners or neighborhoods or communities or homes. So that effort, there's been 300 homes purchased in the last 10 years, I'm sorry, and it continues. There are more homes on the list, and as funding comes through from the city council, from the state to the federal government, Nashville is going to continue to do what it can to remove properties from these high-risk areas so that people don't have to experience this over and over again. And that's something to really think about, to get to the second part of your question. When it comes to growing, right? Nashville is a growing city. There's a lot happening. There's a lot of new development and attracting young people to live there. And that's something to really consider for the development community and the city to consider, that we cannot continue to put homes and buildings and small businesses in harm's way, so that we don't want to be back here having this conversation in 50 years about the same areas and the same properties that continue to flood.
You've spoken positively about a lot of things at the city and at the state level too, what's been done since the flood, but what can we do better? What's not being done?
Sure, there's always more that can be done, right?
Sure. Yeah.
One of the boldest and most difficult things to do is ultimately to not build and not put things in harm's way, right? We know a lot of information today. We know where flooding occurs. We know where it's happened. And Nashville just updated its map, so it has really current information about flood data. And so the best thing that can be done ultimately is to not build in these areas that we know and have mapped out to be the highest risk areas. Now, that is also a very difficult decision for policymakers to make, because you are challenged by economic growth. You are challenged by other interests within the community to grow the social fabric of the community. And so that's something, it should always be considered. We always encourage policymakers to consider that. And if, that's the first thing. And if you can't do that, you have to think about, okay, if we are going to build in this area along the creek, we need to do it in a way that doesn't make flooding worse for the rest of the community. And we need to do it in a way that makes sure that this new structure that we're going to build is resilient to the next flood.
Does that mean raising building standards?
It can mean raising building standards, and that can mean everything from elevation. Nashville has had elevation requirements for residential properties for a long time, actually. And it can mean other things too. There are flood-proofing measures that can be done. It can mean adding more green space to the acreage around the building, so that you have more absorbent area to really take in that water when it floods. So it's not just landing on concrete, which water has nowhere to go when it's on concrete. So there are a lot of different things that can be done.
All right, let's go to our next caller. Joe is hanging with us. Joe, thank you for waiting so patiently. What's your comment or question?
Hey, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I just want to say to Lauren that if you tell homeowners or people that are trying to buy a home and want to buy a home, obviously they should research the topographical map, which tells them how above sea level they are and how above, like, Percy Priest Dam they are. Like, when I bought my home, I found out that I was 94 feet above Percy Priest Dam, which means I'm not buying flood insurance unless I see my neighbor building an ark. So, you got to kind of get into it with we have hundreds of thousands of acres in Davidson County that are way above the flood level. And it's important that that's where we should build. We don't need to be building in these areas that are prone to flooding. I just want to hear comments on that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Joe. Your thoughts, Laura?
I agree. There about 12% of the county is in a flood-prone area, and you're right. There is plenty of other space to build, and that's really where you need a lot of different interests to come together. You need the development community, you need city planners, you need resiliency planners, and you need elected officials to make those decisions to make sure that we're planning for new things to put them on higher ground. Even if your risk is low, flood insurance really is that first line of defense when it comes to mitigation, right? So if your risk is really low and you carry flood insurance, that also means it's often very cheap, right? Because your risk is very low. So it can never be a bad thing to have flood insurance, just as that first line of defense.
I'm glad you brought up insurance. I've been wanting to ask you about this because you hear so many things about flood insurance. It's sky high in price. It really is not going to cover you, even though you have it. It's so limited, and there's lots of ins and outs that you need to understand. A lot of small print. Give me the 411 on flood insurance. What's the real story?
There are a lot of myths out there about flood insurance, as you just listed some of them, and it is complicated. It's a federally subsidized program that was originally designed to shore up the folks who simply needed the most and could not afford it. And at the time, the private sector was really not an option. Since then, the program started in the 60s. It's grown to serve about 5 million policyholders across the country. And it does offer, discounted or subsidized flood insurance to those who live in the highest risk areas. It really varies, right? If your risk is extremely high, your insurance is going to be higher, much like you can equate it to car insurance or health insurance. So it's a similar system in terms of rate setting. And there is an effort underway now to really get a handle on the rates and better understand them and have more specific rate setting so that, if you and I live in the same community and you live up on a hill and I live down by the water, we should not be paying the same rates. And sometimes that is the case right now. And so there's an effort by FEMA and the federal government to really try and make those rates more fair and understandable. And there's a lot of confusion just around who provides it. Anyone can get flood insurance. You don't have to be required. You don't have to live in a flood zone. Anyone can get flood insurance. And if an insurance agent tells you otherwise, they're wrong. And you should call someone else, because anyone can get flood insurance, and like I said, it really is that first line of defense for when a flood does happen. Is it still only offered from the government, though? It's not a private insurance offering? There are. So FEMA, the federal government provides it. They essentially serve as the sort of administrative piece of it, and they work with several private insurance companies to provide it. They have sort of a relationship where they are the provider of the actual flood insurance. Outside of that, there are private companies who offer it on their own, and it's a small industry, but it is growing as flood risk is growing. Are there little ins and outs that homeowners should definitely be aware of before they say yes or no to flood insurance, no matter where they get it? Those little caveats that kind of come back to bite you. I think the most important thing, was brought up already. Try and understand what you can about the house that you're buying. Ask questions, because it's really easy to ignore some of those things or not think about it because you fall in love with the house so quickly and so easily sometimes, right? It's such an emotional journey for most of us. And sometimes it's because of the red door. That's so true. But it's really important. Ask questions of the realtor, of the seller. Ask as many questions as you can, and really read that disclosure, because Tennessee does have those requirements in place, and so sellers should be putting information in there about previous flooding. So that's really the first step. And think about it. If you can see water. You're probably in an area that could be risky. And if you're in some cases, if that's okay to you and you're willing to take that risk, which a lot of people are, because water is beautiful and we all want to live by it, right? Then get flood insurance, whether you're required to get it or not. and really take some other factors into consideration about shoring up your home against flooding.
Gotcha. All right, we are coming up on the half hour. We're going to take a quick break. Sandra, I know you're on the line. Please stay with us during the break. We'll get to your question right after this.